Every single person listening to this right now is moving. And I mean moving fast.
That's one way to put it.
No, seriously, forget about your commute or your vacation plans. We are talking cosmically fast. The Earth travels about 940 million kilometers through space every single year.
Which means we're all hurtling forward at something like over 107,000 kilometers an hour.
Exactly. That planetary motion, that relentless constant speed is guaranteed. It never stops.
And that constant motion is the perfect analogy for this powerful paradox that really defined the strategic environment of 2025.
A paradox? How so?
Well, when you looked around the world, you saw two fundamentally different tracks running in parallel. On one track, you had very visible stagnation.
Right. Ongoing conflicts, climate pressures, democratic backsliding, that was hard to miss.
Impossible to ignore. But right alongside it, something else was accelerating just as clearly. The quiet conditions for genuine breakthroughs.
And these breakthroughs are structurally compressing timelines by years, sometimes even decades.
Yes. Technology, governance, economics, all moving at breakneck speed in very specific areas. And when you try to reconcile those two tracks, the stagnation and the acceleration, you get to our core concept for this deep dive.
The velocity gap.
The velocity gap.
Yeah.
It's a simple idea, but terrifyingly consequential. It's the moment when the world outside your organization.
So technology, market shifts, new rules.
Exactly. When all of that is moving fundamentally faster than your internal systems can handle, you aren't just behind. You are operating in a different temporal reality.
And the sources we've pulled for this deep dive really frame that gap perfectly. It's the difference between just surviving global upheaval, riding out the storms, and actually benefiting from the pathways of possibility that those very upheavals create.
It has lost competitive advantage, measured in real time.
So our mission today is to map that gap. We've extracted 20 specific, non-obvious signals from 2025 that show exactly where structural friction was removed.
Across global trade, energy, healthcare, work, we need to analyze those breakthroughs and figure out what they demand of your strategic planning for 2026.
We're looking beyond the headlines of crisis and focusing on where the world is actually constructing its new infrastructure. Okay, let's unpack this. So let's start with the immediate practical meaning of operating inside that velocity gap.
Right. It's the moment your lack of internal speed makes an external breakthrough totally irrelevant to you.
Give us an example.
Okay, so if you're a manufacturing firm and it takes you, say, 18 months to adopt a new supply chain partner.
A typical time frame for a big company.
Right. But your competitor can make that same shift in 3 weeks because they have all the digital rails in place. Well, they benefit from the resilience, and you don't. You're stuck.
That observation points to a critical strategic shift our sources highlighted. For years, leaders have been trained to focus almost exclusively on volatility.
Yes. The visible crises, the geopolitical fires, the supply shocks, they were optimizing for disorder management.
But they were looking in the wrong place for the future, weren't they?
They often were.
Yeah.
They missed where structural friction was being quietly, systematically removed. And friction is just that bureaucratic, regulatory, or technical resistance to progress.
So when that friction is removed, it creates a slingshot effect.
A huge slingshot effect. Leaders focused only on volatility were defending their existing structures, while others were designing systems to capitalize on all this new openness.
That sounds like the definition of a zero-sum versus a positive-sum mindset.
It is. If you're focused only on risk management, defending your market share, you're perpetually operating in that zero-sum holding game.
We're playing defense.
You're just playing defense, hoping the storm passes without sinking your ship. But the leaders who recognize these signals, who see the removal of friction as an invitation to explore and build, they're operating in a positive-sum environment. They're actively building new value.
So the implication for you listening right now is huge. Your focus literally determines whether you are positioned just to survive the next disruption or to strategically benefit from it.
It's everything. If the speed of business is now cosmically fast, what does that mean for decision latency? It means if you're slow, you aren't just losing market share, you're becoming strategically irrelevant.
Let's turn to some of the specific evidence of this acceleration, maybe starting with the economic and digital architecture shifts that really became concrete in 2025.
Okay. The big headline was that the global economy defied all those widespread forecasts of a hard landing.
It was surprisingly resilient.
Very resilient, and that's a major signal of structural health. Global growth, which the IMF projected to hold steady at about 3.2%, wasn't driven by old-school stimulus.
It was fueled by what?
By genuine productivity gains, the increasing stability of emerging markets, and crucially, the expansion of digital trade. That just accelerated the speed of transactions globally.
And we're seeing the center of gravity continue its inexorable shift toward the global south. We see that really clearly in trade patterns.
Yes. Our sources show around 7% growth in global trade value, but the critical engine was the strong expansion in south-south trade flows.
Why is that so important?
It's crucial because it suggests global trade is becoming less reliant on the traditional north routes and more distributed. More nodes in the network, which increases overall system resilience.
We see the outcome of that in specific markets.
Yeah.
The sources detail something they call the Vietnam premium.
This is a fantastic signal. So Vietnam saw its average monthly wages hit record levels, and this was fueled directly by very sophisticated foreign direct investment.
So this isn't just basic assembly anymore.
No, not at all. This investment is moving the economy into higher value manufacturing. We're talking complex electronics, resilient industrial supply chains.
And the broader strategic insight here isn't just that Vietnam is doing well.
No, the real leverage is that this is a blueprint for the global south. Vietnam is demonstrating a viable path, one that moves an economy from competing on cheap labor to competing on highly skilled, technologically sophisticated, resilient supply chains.
That creates a powerful new engine for the global economy.
A huge new engine. And while Vietnam is a large example, the acceleration is also coming from smaller frontier economies.
Like where?
Places like South Sudan, Guyana, Libya, and Senegal. They're projected to lead the world in overall growth rates. When you look at aggregate demand growth, these places are playing a really outsized role.
And supporting all of this physical trade is a scaling digital architecture. Even with all the geopolitical tension, the Digital Economy Partnership Agreement, or DEPA, kept expanding.
It did. With Costa Rica concluding accession discussions, DEPA provides this critical modular legal backbone for modern trade.
So it's like standardized digital rules for things like cross-border data and e-invoicing?
Exactly. Digital identity verification, too. And that standardization matters so much for speed because it allows for paperless, end-to-end digital trade. It speeds up payments, reduces costs.
It's a game changer for small and mid-sized businesses, I'd imagine.
A total game changer. They used to spend a fortune wrestling with bespoke regulations for every country. This is pure friction removal. Okay, so if that was the economic direction of travel, this next section is about the technological acceleration, where science fiction started moving decisively toward commercial infrastructure in 2025.
And if we're talking about time compression, we have to start with fusion power. For decades, fusion was the energy source that was always 30 years away.
Always. But the private sector is now accelerating dramatically, especially when you contrast it with the delays that public megaprojects like ITER are facing.
The defining signal of 2025 came from Helion Energy.
Yes. They broke ground in July on what they intend to be the world's first commercial fusion power plant up in Washington State. But the physics wasn't even the headline. The finance was.
The power purchase agreement with Microsoft.
That's the one. That single agreement transforms fusion from a distant scientific possibility into a tangible commercial bet.
So what did that do, practically speaking?
It did three things instantly. It established a defined customer, a credible timeline, and a viable private business model centered around connecting to the grid.
So fusion is no longer just a challenge for physicists.
It's a balance sheet risk for investors and an immediate planning issue for utilities. That just drastically shortens the energy transition timeline.
That's a fundamental shift. On a slightly different plane, we saw the maturation of space technology, particularly reusable heavy lift systems.
We're talking about SpaceX's Starship. The key achievement in 2025 wasn't just another successful flight, it was moving to a genuinely reusable heavy lift system.
So we saw the launch tower catch of the booster, the upper stage recovery, all of that becoming, well, routine.
Exactly. And the implication isn't just about faster exploration, it's about crushing the cost barrier to build large-scale infrastructure in orbit.
Because when you drive down the cost per kilogram to orbit,
it unlocks entirely new areas of planning that were, frankly, unimaginable before. Constructing massive orbital solar arrays, building in-space manufacturing platforms, it turns orbit into a new logistics layer for Earth.
And this transition from novelty to core infrastructure is also defining the shift of agentic AI systems in healthcare. They're moving from just being good at chat to actually taking operational action.
That's the crucial distinction. AI models moved beyond just identifying patterns and started demonstrating the ability to, for instance, predict acute kidney injury up to 48 hours in advance.
Which gives doctors a critical lead time.
A huge lead time. And what's more, they are detecting conditions like hypertension and sleep apnea from the passive data gathered by common wearable devices.
That fundamentally changes the game for patient outcomes.
It does. It shifts healthcare from being reactive, waiting for someone to show up with symptoms, to being a proactive, predictive risk management system. For patients, for insurers, for employers, that change in latency transforms everything.
And we should briefly note the WEF's Top 10 Emerging Technologies report. Things like structural battery composites, green nitrogen fixation.
Right. These are innovations that inherently pair deep decarbonization benefits with an economic upside. They continue to erode that old restrictive assumption that growth and sustainability have to be traded off. They're becoming mutually reinforcing.
Okay, let's explore Section 4, the new social contracts and global governance frameworks that solidified in 2025. This is about removing friction in maybe the most important area, human capital and international coordination.
The whole discussion around the nature of work really shifted in 2025, and it was driven by concrete data. The German large-scale trial of the 4-day workweek yielded some definitive results.
And the data was, well, overwhelming. Around 73% of the companies chose to permanently maintain the 4-day schedule.
And they weren't just being nice to their employees.
No, they reported stable or even improved productivity and significantly better employee well-being.
What this trial did was provide the strongest real-world evidence yet that shorter work weeks aren't just a perk. They are a commercially viable model for sustainable performance. It's amazing how quickly good data is overturning old management dogma.
We saw that same principle data overturning dogma apply to income security, too. With cash transfer pilots, like the Give Directly study in rural Kenya.
The results there continue to challenge that old assumption that unconditional transfers discourage work.
What did they find?
The study showed that predictable cash payments can actually increase the rate of business creation, dramatically improve psychological well-being, and lead to higher investment in children's schooling.
So they're not just charity. They can act as a seed capital engine for local economies. It removes the friction of poverty that stops people from taking smart risks.
Exactly. Moving into global governance, one of the biggest accelerations was the global export of digital public infrastructure, or DPI.
This is India's model, right? Aadhaar, the UPI payment rails.
Yes, and it moved from being a national success story to a global template. It's massive. Over 20 countries across Asia, Africa, and Latin America have either adopted or piloted parts of the India stack.
Why is that such a breakthrough?
Because it accelerates financial inclusion. It lets governments and citizens plug into low-cost, interoperable digital rails for identity and payments. They're building a digital economy from the ground up that avoids relying on proprietary, high-fee global systems.
That is removing an enormous structural friction point for billions of people.
Absolutely. We also saw key movement on global treaties. The UN High Seas Treaty hit its 60th ratification in September 2025. That triggers its entry into force.
And that transforms 2/3 of the ocean, previously unregulated areas, into a governed commons.
With tools for marine protected areas, environmental assessments, we are finally gaining velocity on protecting the global commons.
And closer to home, the Council of Europe's Framework Convention on AI moved toward ratification. That's the first binding international treaty on AI.
And it's explicitly focused on embedding human rights principles into AI development. That is crucial for building trust and minimizing societal friction as AI accelerates.
Here's a fascinating twist in sustainability. The Global Plastics Treaty stalled on binding production caps. You'd expect business to be relieved.
You would, but we saw the opposite response. The sources detail a massive coalition of over 300 global companies
Across the entire plastics value chain.
actively pushing governments toward tougher, harmonized, legally binding rules. They are lobbying for stricter regulation on themselves
Why?
because they realize that fragmented regulations create complexity and risk. Tough, harmonized rules provide a clear, level playing field. Modeling shows it would cut waste, create jobs, and unlock hundreds of billions in new investment. Business realized it had to push policy forward.
And finally, we saw shifts in where global decisions are made. The rise of middle powers and historic firsts, like Japan electing Sanai Takaichi as its first female prime minister.
And Namibia inaugurating Netumbo Nandi-Ndaitwah as its first female president. It signals a welcome and necessary diversification of the global decision-making table. So if we synthesize all these signals, what does it all mean? The paradox of 2025 is stark. Visible stagnation is absolutely real, and it continues to define global anxiety.
But that narrative is structurally incomplete.
Completely. Humanity's problem-solving capacity has not stalled, it has evolved, and it accelerated dramatically in 2025.
The implication is that progress remains uneven, and that velocity gap is getting wider. It's pulling apart those organizations optimizing for zero-sum defense from those designing for positive-sum motion.
The ones who are defending what already exists versus the ones who are building on the new digital rails, the new energy solutions, these new governance frameworks.
The strategic question moving forward is no longer simply what is changing. Everyone knows change is constant.
The question is now hyper-specific. Where exactly is structural friction being removed? And how will you align with that specific direction of travel?
As you embark on another 940 million kilometer journey around the sun, let this be your final provocative thought. What's set up for you in your industry, your market, or your skill set that could materially change what is now possible in 2026?
Identifying that acceleration is step one. Leveraging the pathways of possibility created by these breakthroughs. Well, that's where the real strategy for next year begins.